The sea was still burning with the last light of evening when the bride saw him for the final time. He was standing by the dunes, shoes in hand, tie undone, his phone lifted toward the sunset, as if trying to frame one last, perfect picture. Moments later, the tide swallowed his footprints and the music from the reception carried out across the beach. By morning, Daniel Rowe, 31, graphic designer visiting from London, was gone. The search began in panic. Divers scouring the shoreline, drones sweeping the cliffs, friends replaying fragments of memory from the night before. Every theory led nowhere. There was no body, no phone, no trace of him leaving, until the toll gate camera blinked awake. 3 days later, a technician scrolling through license plate footage paused at 3:11 a.m., a single frame showing the groom's rental SUV crossing the causeway back to the mainland. A passenger sat in the back seat. The face, half lit by dashboard glow, was Daniel's. But the problem was this. By that time, every witness swore he was already missing. And the man driving that car was supposed to be his best friend. That frame of footage, 7 blurry seconds long, would unravel an entire wedding party, a friendship, and a story no one had meant to tell. The invitation had arrived 6 months earlier, printed on thick ivory paper, the kind that smelled faintly of salt when it came out of the envelope. The words were simple. Join us in Tulum, under the palms, where the sea meets forever. For Daniel Rowe, the timing couldn't have been better. London had felt smaller lately, gray, restless, predictable. Work had become a carousel of revisions and client calls that blurred into one another. He'd just ended a long relationship and was living out of a suitcase in a rented flat above a bakery. So when his university friend Mark Avery invited him to Mexico to be a groomsman, he said yes without hesitation. Come for a week, Mark had told him. It'll be like old times. We'll drink, dance, and forget we ever grew up. Daniel booked the flight that night, a window seat to Cancun, a break from himself. The resort sat along a crescent of white sand 2 hours south of the airport. Palm trees leaned like tired dancers in the wind. By day, the sea shimmered turquoise. By night, it became a sheet of black glass. Everything was soft, scented, and faintly unreal, like a dream rented by the hour. Guests arrived in slow waves. There were cousins in linen shirts, old classmates Daniel hadn't seen in a decade, and the kind of new acquaintances who already spoke in inside jokes by the first toast. He smiled easily, but something in his eyes stayed elsewhere. People said he looked lighter, calmer, though those who knew him best noticed the pause before he answered questions, the way he'd look at the horizon mid-conversation. Still doing design? Mark asked that first night. Daniel nodded. Still pretending it means something? Mark laughed. He always laughed first, loudly, as if sound could fill the silence between them. The wedding week unfolded like a film on slow rewind. Morning swims, long lunches, tequila in the afternoons. The kind of happiness that feels rehearsed but still worth repeating. On the third day, the bride, Elena Morales, warm, meticulous, the center of every room, organized a beach bonfire for the guests. Someone brought a speaker, someone else a bottle of mezcal. Music rose into the night. That was when Daniel met Sophie, one of Elena's co-workers from Madrid. She was laughing at a story about missed flights and bad weather, her hair wild from the humidity. They spoke for an hour without noticing the tide creeping up to their chairs. At one point she said, "You look like someone who takes pictures but never keeps them." He smiled. That's fair. There are photos from that night, grainy, overexposed, filled with motion blur. In most, Daniel's in the background, half turned away, a beer bottle dangling from one hand. He looks happy enough to be mistaken for free. Still, there were things no one noticed then. That he left the bonfire early, that his phone buzzed twice near midnight, and he slipped away to take the call. That Sophie saw him later on the balcony of his room, smoking, looking out over the dark ocean as if waiting for something to surface. She thought it was nothing. The next morning, his bed was made. He came down for breakfast, same as always, joked with the staff, asked if anyone wanted to drive into town for supplies. He went with Mark, the groom. They returned before noon. Witnesses remember them carrying bags, water, fruit, sunscreen, and a bottle of cheap rum. Nothing unusual, except for one thing. The resort's front desk clerk would later tell police that Daniel asked a strange question while signing the receipt. He asked, "How late does the toll road stay open?" The clerk hesitated. "The toll? For the bridge?" Daniel nodded. "Yeah, just curious." That evening, rehearsal dinner, long tables under string lights, a toast that turned into a round of applause. The kind of celebration where everything glows too warm to feel real. There's video from that night recorded by a guest's phone, Daniel clapping, smiling, his hand brushing Mark's shoulder as the group cheers for the couple. At 10:47 p.m., he lifts his glass. At 10:48, he looks toward the beach. The camera pans away. No one knew that would be the last image of him fully alive. Later, Mark would tell investigators that Daniel had seemed distracted, but fine. "He was quiet, but that's Daniel," he said. "He just thinks too much." He claimed that after the speeches, Daniel went down to the shore to take photos. That was the last time he saw him. But another guest, Sophie, remembered differently. She said she'd seen Daniel again, after midnight, near the resort entrance. He was standing beside a white SUV, the same one Mark had rented for the week. She thought he was waiting for someone. When she waved, he hesitated, then smiled. She said his eyes looked tired, like he hadn't slept in days. She went inside. When she looked out again, he was gone. By sunrise, the air had changed. Staff began setting up breakfast tables. The ocean looked calm, too calm. Elena was the first to notice his room door still closed. By 8, she asked the front desk if Daniel had checked out early. The clerk shook his head. His keys still active. They called his phone. No answer. They checked the beach, the pool, the car park. Nothing. By 9:30, Mark was pacing the lobby, half-dressed, barefoot, asking if anyone had seen him leave. Someone said they thought they heard an engine around 2 a.m., but couldn't be sure. Another said maybe Daniel had gone swimming. When police arrived an hour later, they found his belongings neatly arranged. Wallet, charger, passport. No signs of packing, no note. Only his camera was missing. In the early hours of the investigation, everything pointed toward the sea. Tides were strong that night, one officer explained. Maybe he'd gone for a walk, slipped. The current could have carried him out in minutes. Divers searched until dusk. They found nothing. That evening, Elena postponed the ceremony. Guests sat in silence at the open-air bar, faces turned toward the horizon where police boats moved like dark commas against the light. Mark sat apart, hands clasped, muttering something no one could hear. When a friend approached, he said only one sentence. He wouldn't leave me like that. The first mystery came from the resort's security logs. Daniel's room door opened at 12:42 a.m., closed at 12:43. Never opened again. No other key cards registered to his room. No staff entries, no cleaning logs. The second came from the parking lot footage. At 1:58 a.m., headlights swept across the sand road leading out of the property. The SUV, license plate partially visible, registered to Mark Avery. The video lasted 8 seconds before the camera glitched to static. The third mystery came from the road itself. No toll record of the SUV returning that night. No witness recalling it at any gas station or rest stop. It was as if the road had swallowed them both. When authorities questioned Mark, he said he'd been asleep. He insisted someone must have taken the car without permission. Keys were in the room, he said. He offered to help search. He cried during interviews. He hugged Elena and promised to find him. But something felt off. Detectives noticed his watch stopped at 3:10 a.m. Forst's glass cracked. He said he'd dropped it the night before. Still, there was no evidence, no body, no blood, no crime. Until the toll gate camera surfaced 3 days later. The technician who found it was a local contractor named Luis Ortega. He'd been reviewing system maintenance logs after a power outage. At 3:11 a.m., One camera on the bridge between the resort island and the mainland captured a single frame of the SUV. License plate visible, headlights on, driver's profile, male, and in the back seat, slumped slightly to one side, another figure. The face resembled Daniel, too closely to ignore. The discovery changed everything. What had looked like a tragic accident now looked like movement, intentional, deliberate. If Daniel was alive at 3:11 a.m., then someone had driven him across that bridge. Someone who wanted him to disappear somewhere far from the sea. When detectives confronted Mark with the footage, he froze. He asked to see it again. Then he said quietly, "That's not him." But his voice broke on the last word. That night, as the wedding guests packed their bags under police watch, a storm rolled in from the horizon. Palm fronds thrashed against windows, rain hammered the pool deck, and the ocean, calm for days, rose in waves like black glass shattering on the shore. Elena watched it from her balcony, veil still draped over a chair. In her hands she held the same invitation that had brought them all there. The ink had bled from the humidity, the words now ghosted into gray. Below her, detectives cordoned off the parking lot. Flashes from their flashlights blinked across the sand like lightning trapped in glass. The wedding that was meant to begin in joy had become a vigil. And somewhere inland, along the toll road lit only by sodium lamps, a single SUV had vanished into the night, its story just beginning to speak. It began as the kind of night people wish they could bottle, warm, endless, perfectly alive. The wedding rehearsal had ended hours earlier, but the party didn't know how to stop. Music pulsed through the palm trees. Laughter carried over the surf. It was 1 a.m., and the shoreline outside the resort still shimmered with lanterns swaying in the wind. Daniel Rowe was somewhere between the celebration and the sea. Friends remembered him moving in and out of the light, sometimes dancing, sometimes alone near the dunes. He wasn't drunk, they said, just thoughtful. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel heavy until it vanishes altogether. By 1:15, the music began to fade. Guests drifted back to their rooms, barefoot, sand stuck to their ankles. The sound of glassware clinking echoed from the bar, followed by the slow metallic hum of cleanup. Somewhere above the noise, the night insects started to sing, a high, constant frequency that filled the silence once laughter died. The last confirmed conversation Daniel had was with a bartender named Mateo. He said Daniel came up to the counter, asked for a bottle of water, then hesitated before paying. He looked at his phone, Mateo remembered, like he was waiting for someone to answer. After a moment, Daniel smiled faintly, placed a few pesos on the bar, and walked toward the exit. Security footage from the lobby shows him leaving at 1:42 a.m., white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, phone in hand, barefoot. He turns left, heading toward the parking area. In the corner of the frame, something moves, headlights blinking twice, then cutting out. Investigators would later freeze that frame for hours. The shape of the vehicle matched the rented SUV belonging to Mark Avery, the groom. But in that footage, the driver's side door was already open. From there, the night breaks into fragments, small, overlapping testimonies that build a mosaic of uncertainty. Sophie, the woman Daniel met at the bonfire, told police she saw him again near the Palm Walk at around 2 a.m. He looked startled, she said, as if surprised to be seen. When she asked where he was going, he smiled and said, "Just a drive. Clear my head before tomorrow." She laughed, thinking it a joke. After all, the wedding was in 8 hours. But his eyes didn't move from the road. "Be careful," she said. He nodded once, then slipped into the dark. The front desk clerk, Rosa Aguilar, remembered hearing the engine start moments later. It wasn't loud, just a low mechanical growl swallowed by the wind. She didn't see who was inside. When she checked the logbook the next morning, she found no entry for vehicle departure. Guests weren't required to sign out, but something about it unsettled her. The memory of those headlights. The faint rhythm of tires over gravel. What happened after that was reconstructed from 3 sources: a phone signal, a toll booth camera, and the sudden blackout of both. Daniel's phone last connected to a network tower at 2:12 a.m., halfway along the coastal causeway that linked the island resort to the mainland. The tollgate camera, old low resolution, triggered exactly 59 seconds later. At 3:11 a.m., it captured one image, The SUV crossing the bridge. Rain streaked the windshield, obscuring the view. The driver's silhouette is unmistakably male. In the rear seat, a second figure's reflection shimmers faintly in the mirror. Technicians who enhanced the image later identified it as Daniel, shoulder line, shirt pattern, matching wristwatch. But the timestamp didn't make sense. The resort's log showed Daniel's room card used at 12:43 a.m., no entry afterward. His phone registered movement at 2:12 a.m., nearly 90 minutes later. And yet the system logs for the toll camera placed the SUV on the bridge nearly an hour after that. If he'd gone for a drive, why no return? If he hadn't, who was behind that wheel? Police searched the toll road that morning. Nothing unusual, just tire marks that ended near the rest stop 12 miles inland. A gas station attendant there recalled seeing the SUV parked by the pumps between 3:30 and 4 a.m. He said a man bought coffee and cigarettes, paid in cash, and left. He remembered the man's accent. British, he said. He was certain. But when shown a photo lineup, the attendant pointed not to Daniel but to Mark Avery, the groom. At 6:45 a.m., Elena woke alone. Mark's side of the bed was empty, the sheets still warm. She assumed he'd gone for a morning walk. It wasn't until guests began asking about Daniel that she realized both men were missing. By 8, staff confirmed that the SUV was gone. Police were called by 9. By 10, Mark returned on foot, drenched, clothes streaked with sand. He said the car had been stolen. He said he'd gone to look for Daniel, then got lost on the road when the storm rolled in. He said he didn't remember much else. Officers noted his pupils were dilated. There were scratches on his wrist. His knuckles were bruised. When they asked where the car was, he said, "It was gone when I woke up." Meanwhile, the search widened across the coastline. Helicopters scanned the water. Rescue teams traced the mangrove trails behind the resort. Divers found nothing, but what they did find, half buried in the sand near the North Dune, was Daniel's camera. The memory card was missing. Forensic teams dusted it for prints. Only his own were found. The strap was torn cleanly as though yanked off. It looked like someone had wanted it, then changed their mind. That afternoon, the wedding party gathered in silence in the dining hall. Police asked each guest to surrender their phones for inspection. Messages were combed through, photos copied, timestamps matched. One text stood out. At 2:06 a.m., Daniel had sent a message to Sophie. It read, "He's not who he says." The message was never delivered. By the time her phone connected to Wi-Fi, the signal had already died. Detective Hernan Silva, who led the inquiry, said later that this was the first moment he suspected foul play. It wasn't just the missing man, he said. It was the timing, the way everything stopped talking at once. He ordered a trace on Daniel's last known route using local CCTV networks. One grainy clip, taken from a roadside motel at 3:27 a.m., showed the SUV passing by again. Same plate, same pattern of mud on the door. No passengers visible this time. The car was found 48 hours later, abandoned in a sugarcane field 20 miles inland. Doors locked. Keys missing. Inside, the seats were soaked from rain, and the glove box was empty except for a folded napkin, written on it in smeared ink. He saw. When investigators presented this to Mark, he broke. Not into tears, but into silence, long, unblinking, unnerving. Finally, he said, "That's not my writing." But forensic analysts confirmed the ink matched a pen found in his room. The handwriting, though shaky, bore similarities. Enough to raise questions still, no body, no proof of death. The case hovered between tragedy and suspicion, unable to choose a side. Elena canceled the wedding that evening. The resort emptied slowly, guests leaving in small, guilty groups. The bar closed early. The ocean, indifferent, erased whatever it had witnessed. Detective Silva remained behind with a small team. They stayed up through the night, combing through timestamps, message logs, and GPS trails. Every path returned to the same image, the toll gate camera. The frozen frame of that SUV crossing the bridge at 3:11 a.m. Daniel's reflection faint behind the glass. But reflection or not, one thing didn't match Daniel's wristwatch, visible in the footage. Read 2:47. The toll camera read 3:11. That 24-minute difference would later rewrite the entire case. At dawn, A fisherman named Rafael Cruz arrived at the police tent with something he'd found near the inlet, 3 miles north of the bridge. A shoe, sand-colored, soaked, coated in seaweed. He handed it over, saying it had washed up overnight. Officers identified it as Daniel's. His footprint matched. They took it as proof he'd drowned. Closed the search at sea by midday. But that evening, as the technician in the control center reviewed the toll footage again for backup, something strange happened. The system flagged a duplicate frame, same time, same car. But in this version, the passenger's head turned toward the window. His eyes, in the pixelated blur, were open, and his expression, whatever it was, looked nothing like fear. It looked like recognition. Detective Silva ordered a reanalysis of all footage within a 30-minute radius. That's when they discovered the final piece of data. A camera from the next toll plaza inland recorded at 3:52 a.m., showing the same SUV passing through again. This time only one person was visible. The driver. He wore a white shirt. His sleeves rolled, his face obscured by glare. But when technicians adjusted the contrast, a ring on his left hand caught the light. The same gold band Mark Avery had been given the night before, during his rehearsal dinner. It was no longer a missing person case. It was a timeline, one that bent, broke, and refused to align. By the end of the 72nd hour, detectives had everything but a confession. A missing man. A friend whose story shifted like sand. A single frame of video that showed the truth hiding inside its blur. And somewhere inland, on a forgotten stretch of road where the jungle began to reclaim the asphalt, tire tracks vanished into green. That was where the search team stopped, and where the camera, as if with a conscience, finally spoke. Rain hammered the resort roofs through the night, washing footprints off the sand and blurring the edges of what little evidence remained. By sunrise, the beach looked untouched again, as though no one had ever vanished from it. But inside the police tent pitched near the entrance, Detective Hernan Silva refused to let the tide rewrite the story. He stood over a corkboard covered in photos. The SUV. The toll gate stills, Daniel's smiling passport picture clipped beside a close-up of his shoe. To anyone else, it looked like fragments. To Silva, it was a map that didn't know what it was yet. He began with what the sea couldn't erase. Data. The toll gate footage was transferred to a secure forensic server. Technicians isolated every frame, running it through enhancement software until the noise became shapes and the shapes became choices. At 3:11:06 a.m., the car crossed into frame. At 3:11:09, the rear passenger turned his head slightly. And in that motion, Silva saw something that changed the tone of the case. The eyes weren't unfocused. They were looking outward, directly at the camera. Victims don't look at cameras, Silva murmured. He asked his assistant, Marta, to overlay the timestamp with GPS tower data. The two didn't match. The signal ping from Daniel's phone had died 20 minutes before the toll crossing, which meant either the footage was delayed, or the man in the back seat wasn't Daniel Rowe at all. By noon, the missing person file had evolved into a criminal investigation. Forensics combed the SUV again. They found faint fingerprints along the interior handle of the back door, Daniel's left hand smudged with salt. On the exterior, they found another set, partial, inverted, consistent with someone closing the door from outside. That second print matched Mark Avery. Still, Mark maintained his story. He said he'd been searching for Daniel, that he'd fallen asleep in the car, that someone else could have driven it while he was unconscious. He looked exhausted, eyes bloodshot, skin burned by the sun and worry. But exhaustion doesn't rewrite physics, Silva kept pressing. What's the last thing you remember clearly? Mark hesitated. The music, he said. Daniel standing near the dunes. He said he wanted to show me something, then I woke up on the road. Where on the road? I don't know. It was still dark. Silva wrote one word on his pad. Liar. While local police handled the beach, the Mainland Toll Authority handed over an archive of every vehicle crossing that night. Only 6 cars passed between 2:30 and 3:30 a.m. 2 were delivery trucks. 1 was a taxi returning to town. 1 was the SUV. And 2 were unregistered. Fake plates, mismatched registration, tinted windows. Both crossed the bridge within 5 minutes of the SUV. 1 before. 1 after. That discovery reframed the narrative. The bridge wasn't an exit. It was a funnel, Something organized, timed, deliberate. The deeper Silva dug, the more the story bled beyond the wedding. The rental company record showed the SUV had been booked not by Mark Avery directly, but through a travel coordinator named Hugo Salinas. Salinas was later found to be an alias connected to 3 other bookings tied to previous disappearances across the Yucatan coast. Each involved a tourist who'd vanished near private resorts. Each last seen entering a vehicle registered under a similar alias. Silva's jaw tightened as he read through the files. "This isn't a coincidence," he said. "It wasn't the ocean taking people. It was a system." Back in London, Daniel's sister, Claire Rowe, received the call. She'd been expecting a postcard, not a detective. She flew out 2 days later, pale, exhausted, carrying a folder of Daniel's digital accounts. She arrived at the station wearing the same blue raincoat Daniel had bought her on their last trip together. Silva met her at the airport, eyes tired but kind. "I promise," he said. "We'll find what happened." She nodded. Her voice shook only once. "He wouldn't leave without telling me." She gave them access to his cloud drives, his email, his backup photos. And that's where the next crack appeared. In a folder labeled Weddings Tulum, Daniel had uploaded 78 images before his disappearance. 77 were normal: sunsets, guests, candid smiles. The 78th was different: a blurry frame of a white van parked behind the resort. Inside, 2 men sat in the front seat. One of them, grainy, distant but clear enough, looked like Mark Avery. When shown the image, Mark didn't deny it. "Yes, that's me," he said. "Daniel asked me to help him photograph the setup crew. We were just messing around." But Silva checked the metadata. That photo had been taken the same evening Daniel disappeared, 7:49 p.m., hours before the last sighting on the beach. More importantly, the van wasn't listed as part of the wedding rental fleet. Its plates traced back to a logistics company dissolved 2 years earlier. Marta read the registration details aloud. Owner, Salinas Distribution. The same alias that booked the SUV. The circle was closing. While forensics worked on the vehicle, Silva followed a smaller lead, a data recovery specialist named Rodrigo Vega, who'd managed to extract fragments from Daniel's broken camera. The memory card had been wiped, but ghost files remained. Among them, a 5-second video clip time-stamped 12:44 a.m., just 1 minute after Daniel's room door last opened. The footage was shaky, handheld. A dimly lit hallway, a man's voice saying, "We shouldn't do this tonight." Another voice replying, "He already knows." The clip ended abruptly. The second voice, analysts confirmed, was Mark Avery's. When confronted with the recording, Mark went silent. His lawyer called for a break. After 2 hours, he returned, pale and trembling. He said he'd been threatened, that Daniel had discovered something about the wedding accounts, money transfers, offshore payments, stolen design assets. He said Daniel had planned to confront him after the ceremony, that someone else had wanted to stop him first. But when asked who, he stared down at the table. "I don't know their names," he whispered. "Only their car, the van from Daniel's photo." Silva sent out an alert for similar vehicles across coastal checkpoints. 2 days later, one was located abandoned near Merida, burned out, stripped beyond recognition. Inside, forensic teams found charred remnants of an external hard drive. Data fragments recovered from it revealed one chilling pattern: time-coded recordings from toll gates across 5 regions. License plates, driver faces, passenger faces. Each file was labeled with a single letter, A, B, C, and so on. The last folder was marked R. Inside was only one frame: Daniel's. The footage, when slowed down, showed him stepping toward the camera as though reaching out. He wasn't struggling. He wasn't afraid. He was saying something. 3 words, lips barely moving. Forensic linguists later interpreted it as, "He found me." Silva replayed that line until the words became meaningless sound. He couldn't decide which chilled him more, that Daniel was speaking of Mark or of someone else entirely. As the investigation grew, it attracted attention far beyond Tulum. Interpol joined. British authorities sent liaisons. For 48 hours, Silva worked without rest, piecing together a chronology that felt more like a riddle than a record. Then came the call from the toll system engineers. The timestamp discrepancy, 24 minutes between Daniel's watch and the toll camera, wasn't random. It was the result of manual clock manipulation. Someone inside the system had altered the server's time logs to shift the window of evidence. The change had been made at 3:38 a.m., just 27 minutes after the SUV crossed. The operator's ID matched one account, Luis Ortega, the same technician who first found the footage. When officers went to question Ortega, his apartment was empty. His badge lay on the table. On his laptop screen, a single open file. A still image of Daniel, eyes turned toward the camera. Beneath it, typed in a single line of text. He never left the bridge. For days, search teams returned to the causeway, scanning beneath the pilings where currents twisted into whirlpools. Divers found fragments, plastic, rusted metal, a section of car door believed to be from one of the unregistered vehicles. No human remains, no conclusive proof. But Silva began to suspect what the tide had taken wasn't a body. It was evidence. The network had learned how to erase itself. Meanwhile, in her hotel room, Claire watched the recovered footage again and again. Her brother's face pixelated, his gaze trapped forever in digital twilight. She asked Silva a question he couldn't answer. If that wasn't him in the car, where was he? Silva said nothing. Some truths sound crueler when spoken. He turned back to the board. The timeline stretched across it like a wound. 12:43, door closes. 2:12, phone ping. 3:11, toll gate. 3:38, clock altered. The pattern was clear. Someone had rehearsed this before. In the days that followed, investigators uncovered 3 more toll gate tamperings within the same month, each tied to a missing traveler. Every bridge, every timestamp, every erased minute. The wedding was no longer the story. It was the cover. And Daniel Rowe, somewhere between the island and the mainland, had stumbled into the middle of a machine built to disappear people in the dark. Still, the case remained without closure. No arrests, no confession. Only the toll gate, endlessly recording, endlessly silent. Silva often returned there in the early hours, long after the investigation stalled. He would park by the maintenance booth, stand beneath the hum of sodium light, and watch the road bleed into mist. One night, while reviewing archived footage, a file from 3 days after Daniel's disappearance auto-downloaded from a forgotten backup server. It showed the same SUV returning across the bridge at 4:22 a.m. The driver was alone, but the passenger window, for a fraction of a second, reflected the same face again. Daniel's. Only this time he was smiling. By the 7th day, the investigation had turned from search to reckoning. What began as a man lost to the sea was now a labyrinth of deceit built from glass and light. Detective Silva hadn't slept in 2 nights. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the toll gate, that sterile stretch of road where the truth had hidden inside a blur. At dawn, he returned to the bridge one last time. Fog clung to the asphalt. Waves hissed below, restless, whispering in their rhythm the same question that haunted him. If Daniel crossed, why did he never arrive? Silva leaned against the barrier, watching the slow crawl of cars. Their headlights flared and faded like breathing. He realized that somewhere in all that recorded motion the system had lied, not to hide Daniel's death, but to stage it. The first break came from Marta, his assistant. She'd been reanalyzing the SUV's GPS logs. "Look at this," she said, sliding a laptop toward him. The rental tracker wasn't disabled, it was cloned. The signal that showed the car crossing the bridge at 3:11 a.m. wasn't from the real vehicle. It was a ghost feed. Duplicated coordinates transmitted from a second GPS module hidden under the chassis. The true location of the SUV at that time, 10 miles east near an abandoned toll construction site called Puente Viejo, the old bridge. The realization landed like thunder. The video they'd been chasing for days wasn't showing the crime. It was the alibi. Silva and his team drove out to Puente Viejo before sunrise. The structure was unfinished, closed to the public, its half-built lanes rusted with salt and neglect. Sea wind howled through its hollow pillars. It was a place that smelled of concrete, rain, and memory. They found tire impressions in the dust, half washed by storms. Beside them, footprints, one set deep and heavy, the other dragging slightly. And near the edge of the bridge, where the railing stopped short, a single object glinted in the sand. A camera lens, cracked but intact. Silva turned it over in his palm. It matched the model Daniel had used, the missing lens from his camera. He knew then this was where it had happened. Forensics confirmed traces of engine oil, the same compound used in the rental SUV. Blood was found too, microscopic, embedded in the gravel, enough for DNA extraction. It matched Daniel, but here's where logic fractured. The quantity was minimal, no sign of major injury. Whoever bled here had walked away. Silva looked over the bridge's edge. Below, the sea churned like black smoke. If Daniel had fallen, his body would have surfaced by now. He hadn't drowned. He'd been taken. They found the truth not in the ocean, but in code. One of the Interpol analysts uncovered a hidden directory inside the burned hard drive from the van. It contained scripts, automated systems built to overwrite surveillance footage with pre-recorded video loops. Each loop featured vehicles identical in color, shape, and registration to those used by the network. It wasn't just about kidnapping. It was choreography. The tollgate cameras, the road logs, even the phone pings, all part of a synchronized illusion designed to make disappearances look like accidents. Silva stared at the lines of code scrolling across the monitor. "This isn't random," he said. "It's theater," Marta nodded. "Then who's directing it?" The answer came from a source they didn't expect. Luis Ortega, the vanished technician. 2 weeks after his disappearance, his ID card pinged at a gas station 200 miles south. Surveillance footage captured him buying coffee and a prepaid phone. He looked nervous, unshaven, eyes darting. An hour later, he called the station's tip line. The voice message was short, trembling. "I did what they told me," he said. "Check the backups." The real video never left, then silence. He hung up. The call traced to a number registered under Mark Avery's company, Avery Digital Design Loundain. When Silva confronted Mark again, the groom's composure shattered. He admitted to transferring money to Ortega, but claimed it was for data recovery. Daniel had, he said, uncovered footage that compromised high-profile clients connected to the resort's parent company. He insisted he hadn't hurt his friend, only tried to protect him from the people who had. Daniel was going to expose them, Mark said, voice breaking.
He thought he could handle it. Silva pressed.
"Who are they?" Mark whispered one name, Hugo Salinas, the fake travel agent. The same alias tied to every missing tourist case. Interpol traced the alias to a man named Sebastian Hugo Serrano, a former IT engineer for Mexico's federal highway system. He'd helped design the very toll network that recorded Daniel's disappearance. After his dismissal for data tampering, he'd vanished, resurfacing as a logistics contractor for private resorts. He'd built a ghost system. Within the infrastructure, a hidden layer of code that let him access, alter, and replay camera feeds in real time. Every missing tourist, every unexplained crossing, all manipulated from inside. And according to Ortega's message, Daniel Rowe had stumbled across proof of it. Silva reviewed Daniel's recovered emails. 3 days before the wedding, Daniel had sent Mark a message marked urgent. "You need to see what's on these files. Someone's using your company name to mask." Payments to Salinas Distribution. Attached was a folder labeled Tollgate. It contained screenshots of altered timestamps and looping footage and the same visual patterns Silva's team would later uncover. Daniel had found the mechanism before anyone realized it existed. He hadn't just been a tourist. He'd been the witness, and someone decided the easiest way to erase a witness was to turn his disappearance into another unsolved mystery. At sunset, Silva returned to the toll gate with Marta. They requested access to the raw footage backups, this time pulling not just the frame at 3:11 a.m., but the entire 5-minute sequence before and after. For the first time, the feed played continuously, unedited. At 3:08, the SUV approached slowly, headlights off. At 3:09, the driver got out, walked to the booth, and pressed something against the sensor, a magnetic key. The gate lifted. At 3:10, he returned to the car. A shape moved in the back seat, someone sitting upright. At 3:11:04, as the vehicle rolled forward, the passenger turned toward the camera. Not Daniel, but a man wearing Daniel's shirt. His face was similar enough to fool the untrained eye, but sharper, older. The driver, captured for a split second in the reflection of the windshield, was Mark. Silva froze the frame. He zoomed into the driver's wrist. a silver bracelet identical to one given as a groomsman's gift. But on the inner surface, engraved words caught the light. For H. M. Hugo Serrano. Mark Avery. Partners. When confronted with the footage, Mark didn't deny it. He confessed, but not in guilt and in exhaustion. He said Serrano had approached him months earlier, offering to clear his debts through a digital maintenance contract for the resort. He hadn't known what it involved until Daniel started asking questions. When Daniel showed him the evidence, Serrano gave him a choice: make it disappear or disappear himself. Mark agreed to help fake a cover-up, never believing it would end in violence. They were supposed to stage Daniel's departure: a car ride, a vanished signal, a drowned man who never made it home. But something went wrong. Daniel resisted. There was a struggle near the unfinished bridge. Mark said he tried to stop Serrano, but the car door slammed. Daniel fell, hit his head. He swore he was alive when they drove off. He swore Serrano promised to take care of it. Silva listened, unmoving. He'd heard every version of guilt in his career. This one sounded like grief wrapped in cowardice. "Where is he?" Silva asked quietly. Mark closed his eyes. He said he'd put him somewhere no one looks. 2 days later, Serrano's location pinged from a cargo dock north of Merida. Interpol agents raided the site at dawn. They found computer servers, forged IDs, and hard drives stacked in crates. Serrano was gone, but among the seized items was a waterproof case labeled Roe. Inside was Daniel's missing camera card. The footage on it lasted 3 minutes. It began with the SUV parked on Puente Viejo. Daniel's voice, calm, controlled. "If this video is found, something's happened. I'm leaving evidence on both drives. I trust Mark, but I don't trust the system." He pauses, looks straight into the lens. They're using the roads. The cameras. Everything we think watches for safety. It's a net. Once you're inside, you don't come back out. The final seconds show headlights approaching from behind. A man's silhouette stepping out. Daniel turns. His mouth moves, barely audible. "It's you." Then static. Silva watched the clip 3 times before turning it off. There was no blood, no body, just an ending cut short. He filed it as evidence 47A, though he already knew it was more than proof. It was confession, prophecy, and warning all in one. The next day, Mark Avery was arrested for obstruction, conspiracy, and accessory to abduction. He never stood trial. A week before his hearing, he was found in his holding cell, dead from an apparent suicide. On his left wrist was the silver bracelet, its engraving filed down to nothing. Months passed. The ocean reclaimed the old bridge. Tourists returned to Tulum. The wedding was never rescheduled. Silva remained haunted by one thing: the smile in that final toll gate reflection. If the man in the car wasn't Daniel, then why did Daniel's face reappear 3 days later on the backup footage? He asked Marta to re-examine the data integrity logs. After hours of processing, she looked up, pale. "The frame that shows Daniel smiling, it isn't footage," she said. "It's an overlaid image file. Someone uploaded it after the camera was decommissioned." Silva frowned. "Uploaded by who?" The metadata revealed one user, Daniel Rowe, time-stamped 4 days after his recorded disappearance. Silva stared at the screen until the glow hurt his eyes. He didn't know whether to believe in miracles or manipulation. Either Daniel had survived long enough to expose his captors, or someone wanted them to think he had. Either way, the toll gate had spoken one last truth. The camera that once lied had learned how to haunt. The rain didn't stop for 3 days after Mark Avery's death. It fell in steady sheets over the coastal highway, erasing the chalk lines that once traced tire marks, softening the edges of what had been a crime scene, and turning it back into a road. In the distance, the toll gate still blinked through the mist, automated, obedient, indifferent. Every few minutes a car would pass, the barrier lifting as though nothing had ever happened here. Detective Silva stood beneath the same sodium light that had once illuminated the SUV's passage. He watched the barrier rise and fall, rise and fall. Somewhere in that repetition lay a kind of cruel order, a machine that never forgot, even when humans wanted to. The case file on Daniel Rowe lay open in his hands. No closure stamp, no body, only the phrase "presumed deceased." A line that sounded clean on paper but tasted hollow when spoken aloud. Across the ocean, in a quiet neighborhood in South London, Claire Rowe received the evidence package the embassy had sent. It contained Daniel's belongings, His watch, cracked camera lens, wallet, and the recovered memory card. The officials said it was all they could return. She didn't open the box for 2 weeks. When she finally did, it was raining, the kind of gray drizzle that seemed to follow her brother everywhere in memory. She turned on her laptop, inserted the card, and waited for the files to load. There were 3. The final recording Silva had shown her before she left Mexico. 2 corrupted fragments, and a 4th, hidden, unnamed, time-stamped 4 days after the supposed date of death. The file was only 10 seconds long. Grainy, distorted by interference but audible. A man's voice whispering through static, "The bridge isn't what it looks like." Then the sound of footsteps. And the ocean. For weeks, investigators argued whether it was authentic. Forensics confirmed the voice matched Daniel's. The signal came from a location 6 kilometers inland, far beyond the search radius. It shouldn't have been possible. Silva kept the information classified, at least publicly. He'd seen too many cases crumble under the weight of speculation, but privately it gnawed at him. If Daniel had survived, why hadn't he surfaced? And if he hadn't, who was sending echoes of his voice into the system long after he was gone? The resort reopened 2 months later under a new name. Fresh paint covered the stains on the walls. A new logo adorned the entrance sign. Tourists returned, drawn by the same promise of paradise. None of them noticed the faint discoloration near the palm walk, where salt still marked the spot the SUV had once been parked. Elena never came back. She sold her stake in the property and disappeared from public life, retreating to her family's vineyard in Spain. She declined all interviews. Her last message to the press was brief. "Not everything lost at sea stays there." Interpol released a statement announcing an ongoing pursuit of Sebastian Hugo Serrano, the alleged mastermind behind a network of digital disappearances. They found pieces of his infrastructure scattered across 5 countries. Servers hidden in shipping containers, storage vaults buried beneath parking lots, mirrored camera databases that looped reality like film. Each discovery was a ghost, evidence of an invisible war between truth and deletion. But Serrano himself was never found. Late that year, Silva took an early retirement. He'd spent 3 decades in law enforcement, but this case hollowed something in him. He began taking long drives along the coast, always ending at the bridge. Sometimes he'd stop there in the middle of the night, headlights off, engine idling, listening to the hum of the toll booth. It became a ritual, a way to measure silence, a way to wait for something he couldn't name. One night in December, as fog rolled in from the sea, he noticed a flicker on the toll gate monitor. A car detected, but no vehicle visible. A glitch, maybe, or another echo of Serrano's code still pulsing through the system. He replayed the feed. For one frame, the road appeared empty. In the next, headlights flared. A man walked into view, barefoot, clothes soaked. He paused beneath the toll light, looked up at the camera, and smiled faintly. Then he vanished into the dark. The feed timestamp, 3:11 a.m. The same as the night Daniel Rowe disappeared. Silva froze the image and magnified the face. It was Daniel, or something that looked enough like him to break the heart believing. The footage made its way quietly through internal channels. No official release, no press coverage, just whispers among officers who'd worked the case. Most dismissed it as corrupted footage looping back from old archives. Silva didn't argue, but when he drove home that night, he kept replaying the sound of the ocean on the file Claire had received, the same rhythmic hiss that now filled his ears through the car window. At some point, he realized the sound matched perfectly with the waves beneath the bridge at that very moment, as if 2 recordings, one digital, one real, had fallen into sync. Months later, the toll gate was upgraded. New cameras, new software, new everything. But during installation, technicians found something strange inside the old server. A small external drive soldered into the motherboard. It wasn't part of the official system. Its label was scratched, but faint letters remained. DR on it were fragments of deleted footage, glimpses of other vehicles, other faces, all erased from records. And between them, one message stored as raw binary data, decoded into text by accident. If you're reading this, it means the system works, but not the way they intended. Signed, Daniel Rowe. It changed nothing officially. The authorities classified it as tampering, but among the few who had seen the file, It became an unspoken truth that somewhere between disappearance and discovery, Daniel had learned how to survive inside the very machine built to erase him. Silva believed it. Not because he could prove it, but because some absences feel too deliberate to be coincidence, and because every time the tide rose high enough to touch the bridge, the toll lights flickered. Once, twice, like a signal. In London, Claire kept her brother's files archived on a single hard drive. She'd stopped checking them months ago until one morning her computer chimed with a new folder notification. The timestamp read 02:43 a.m. She hadn't been awake. Inside the folder was one file. A photo, taken from her own webcam. She was asleep, the window behind her open to the streetlight's glow, and in the reflection of the glass, faint but visible, was a man's outline. Barefoot, soaked, smiling. There are cases that end with arrests, and cases that end with ghosts. This one, Silva would later say, lived somewhere between both. The official record closed without a conclusion. The press moved on, but for those who had seen the footage, those who had heard Daniel's whisper through static, it never ended. It lingered like unfinished code, waiting for the next time someone crossed a bridge and vanished just long enough for the camera to blink. On the anniversary of the disappearance, Silva returned one final time. The sea was calm, the sky clear. He parked by the barrier, rolled down his window, and listened. The air smelled of salt and memory. The light above the toll booth flickered once and then steadied. He closed his eyes and for a moment thought he heard a voice carried on the wind. Faint, familiar. I told you the bridge isn't what it looks like. He opened his eyes. The road ahead was empty, stretching into mist. And in the toll camera's reflection, for one impossible second, two silhouettes stood side by side. Then, as the light changed, both were gone. The footage of that moment never appeared in archives. But the system log shows one anomaly, a single timestamp out of sync. Not ahead, not behind, just missing. As if the road itself had chosen to forget. And yet, when the waves broke beneath the bridge that night, they carried with them a rhythm that almost sounded like applause. A small private acknowledgement that some stories don't end, they dissolve into tide and time and light.